Why wasn't Mount Doom guarded? Frodo and Sam weren't exactly great fighters, and yet they did simply walk into Mordor. So, what was going on? Hi everyone, this is Robert. Welcome to Deep Geek. On this channel we cover great fantasy stories like The Lord of the Rings, A Song of Ice and Fire, and The Witcher in nerdy detail. Welcome. It's probably the most famous meme from the Lord of the Rings movies, Boromir stating that one does not simply walk into Mordor. And yet, when you think about it, that's exactly what Frodo and Sam did. They get into Mordor and right across it to the one place where the One Ring could be destroyed. It seems like a pretty massive plot hole. Why didn't Sauron guard his stronghold and the cracks of doom a little better? Well, first of all, obviously Frodo and Sam didn't just walk into Mordor without any trouble. They nearly died several times and only just had enough strength to make it the last few yards up the mountain. It wasn't exactly a hobbit walking party. And that's because the way was guarded very heavily. Let's break this down into three parts. Firstly, getting into Mordor itself. Mordor is protected by three massive and pretty impassable mountain ranges, and the main way in, the Black Gate, did prove impossible to Frodo and Sam. They decided they simply couldn't get in that way. The way they did go, through Cirith Ungol with Gollum, was also very heavily guarded. First there was Shelob, millennia-old offspring of Ungoliant, one of the most horrific creatures ever to bestride Middle-earth. Past her was the Tower of Cirith Ungol itself, garrisoned at the time by around 200 orcs. And if you get past them, then you had to get past the two Watchers, ancient sentinels inhabited by some dreadful spirit of evil vigilance that detected all who tried to pass, visible or invisible, and could prevent you passing by some dark magical means or the power of their will, and who let off a piercing shriek if anyone did pass. The hobbits only got through with the help of the Phial of Galadriel and invoking the names of Eärendil and Elbereth. So yes, the first part of the way, getting into Mordor in the first place, was heavily guarded. Once into Mordor itself, they needed to head over the plateau of Gorgoroth to get to Mount Doom. That's the second part, and it's fair to say that as they set off, that was also very well guarded. First, they had some ring-wraiths on their fell beasts, then they were greeted by this sight. As far as their eyes could reach, along the skirts of the Morgai and away southward, there were camps, some of tents, some ordered like small towns. One of the largest of these was right below them. Barely a mile out into the plain it clustered like some huge nest of insects, with straight dreary streets of huts and long low drab buildings. About it, the ground was busy with folk going to and fro. A wide road ran from it southeast to join the Morgul Way, and along it many lines of small black shapes were hurrying. The plateau was basically a huge army camp. Frodo and Sam had to completely change their route, adding days to their journey to try to avoid it, and still only narrowly evaded one orc company, and then got co-opted by another. Simply put, Mordor was very guarded. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. Of course, eventually Frodo and Sam did manage to evade all those orcs and humans in Sauron's army, and find a way to trek across the plateau towards Mount Doom. That's where they faced the more geographical defences. Rocky, mountainous landscapes, deep clefts, crumbling cliffs, thickets of brambles with hooked barbs, nothing to eat and almost nothing to drink. Near Mount Doom itself, the air was full of fumes which made the hobbits collapse more than once. An unrelenting landscape. This part of the land may not have had lots of soldiers, but the terrain was a formidable defence. And in case you are thinking that it can't have been that bad if the two hobbits made it through, Tolkien made it very clear that they only managed it because the magical properties of Lembas pulled them through. The Lembas had a virtue without which they would long ago have lain down to die. This waybread of the elves had a potency that increased as travellers relied on it alone and did not mingle it with other foods. It fed the will, and it gave strength to endure, and to master sinew and limb beyond the measure of mortal kind. Simply put, if they hadn't had that Lembas, they would have died. That saved them, as did, wonderfully, Mordor's poor air quality. In the dimness of Mordor's dreary day, few things, even in that land of vigilance, could have espied them, save from close at hand. Of all the slaves of the Dark Lord, only the Nazgul could have warned him of the peril that crept, small but indomitable, into the very heart of his guarded realm. But the Nazgul and their black wings were abroad on another errand. They were gathered far away, shadowing the march of the captains of the West, and thither the thought of the Dark Tower was turned. So stealth was definitely a big issue here, but the bigger issue was that Sauron was distracted. No, more than distracted, he was convinced that he knew where the ring was, and had turned his attention there. This, it has to be said, was a clever ruse by Gandalf, and we need to go back a few days to understand fully why it worked. A couple of weeks earlier, Pippin had gazed into the Orthanc stone, the palantir used previously by Saruman, and Sauron saw him. Sauron obviously made the connection with the hobbit he was searching for. Surely this was him. Then, a couple of days later, Aragorn used the palantir, effectively challenging Sauron, claiming the mantle as Isildur's heir, with the sword reforged that had cut the ring from Sauron's hand first time around. Then, Gandalf had rather ostentatiously turned up at Minas Tirith, flinging light spells around. Aragorn had also appeared there under the standard of Elendil, and surely reports will also have got to Sauron of a hobbit being there too. Then, at Gandalf's urging, Aragorn led the host of the West, in truth quite a depleted force by then, marching on the Black Gate of Mordor itself. What was Sauron to think, other than the allies had the hobbit and therefore the ring? Aragorn had presumably claimed it, and taken over by its lust for power, had led his forces to attack Mordor. Why else go on such a foolhardy mission? Aragorn's force was much, much smaller. It was bound to fail. The impact, of course, was that Sauron moved his army out to the Black Gate, had his Nazgul tracking Aragorn's forces all the way, and left the way briefly open for Frodo and Sam to make it to the foot of Mount Doom. Gandalf's foresight won again. So that's how Frodo and Sam made it those last few miles to the mountain, because of Gandalf's cunning ploy. And thus far I think it's fair to say that the way had been rather heavily defended. Mountains, Shelob, Cirith Ungol, the Two Watchers, the army encampments, the near impassable terrain. But what about the third and final part of their trek through Mordor, Mount Doom itself? Why was there not a guard on the entrance to the Cracks of Doom itself, or a locked door? Well, the lack of a locked door is probably harder to explain. I mean, the way into the mountain was just wide open. How hard would it have been to put in a door with a lock on it? But understanding why there were no guards is to understand one of the most fundamental points of Sauron's psychology. Sauron could not conceive that anyone, given access to the power of the One Ring, would want to destroy it. And furthermore, he thought it inconceivable that anyone would be able to bring themselves to destroy it, given the chance. It was such a powerful magic item, and the pull of power was so great, it would never have crossed his mind to put a guard on the door. It simply wasn't necessary. Actually, to say that he couldn't conceive that anyone might want to destroy the ring is putting it mildly. His mind didn't go anywhere near that possibility, which meant that the Cracks of Doom were not something that needed defending. The Dark Tower where he was, yes, of course. His stores of Mithril or other strategic places, absolutely. But the Cracks of Doom, that was just a mountain, hence the lack of a locked door. He may have used its fires to forge the ring thousands of years earlier, but now there was literally nothing in there but a large cave and a drop into the volcanic depths. Gandalf understood all this, hence the destruction of the ring being his plan all along. As he said in the Council of Elrond, "Let folly be our cloak, a veil before the eyes of the enemy, for he is very wise, and weighs all things to a nicety in the scales of his malice. But the only measure that he knows is desire for power, and so he judges all hearts. Into his heart the thought will not enter that any will refuse it, that having the ring we may seek to destroy it. If we seek this, we shall put him out of the reckoning." This is one of the most important themes of The Lord of the Rings. Evil is the cause of its own downfall. Sauron's inability to understand someone not wanting power completely blinded him to the possibility of his own destruction. So, why wasn't Mordor guarded? It was, very tightly. Even Frodo's secret route in had a garrison of 200, the horror of Shelob, and a usually impassable pair of guarding sentinels. Mordor itself was crawling with orcs until the very last day or two of Frodo's journey, then a cunning distraction cleared the last few miles for them. And finally, Mount Doom, by Sauron's reckoning, didn't need protecting. Why would it? If he'd thought about it, he would be convinced that no one would have the willpower to actually throw the ring into the cracks of doom, or even want to do it in the first place. And we have to recognise that actually, far from this being a huge strategic error on Sauron's part, he was right on that point. No one did have the strength of will to throw the ring into the cracks of doom. Frodo certainly didn't. It's only Gollum's last-minute intervention that accidentally saved the day. Gollum, saved by Bilbo, Frodo, and finally Sam's pity, something Sauron would never be able to understand. This isn't a plot hole, it's a masterful piece of characterization by Tolkien. Mordor was guarded heavily. That wasn't the fatal flaw in Sauron's plan. It was his inability to understand goodness. If you'd like to see more Lord of the Rings videos, please click on the link on the left of your screen. Or if you'd like to support this channel, thank you. There's a link to my Patreon page on the right of your screen. That's all for this time. Thanks for watching. I'll see you again soon.